Today I'm going to go over how to use equations to solve for missing angles. Please follow along as I go over pages 1 and 2, try the practice problems on page 3, and check your answers on page 4. The most important part of today's lesson is that we set up these equations correctly. So remembering what we learned about complementary and supplementary angles. If the two angles that we're given are complementary and their sum is 90 degrees and they make up a right angle, then you have to set up an equation where you add the two angles together and set them equal to 90 degrees. If the two angles you're given are supplementary, if they make up a straight line or the sum of their angle is 180 degrees, you have to add the two angles together and set them equal to 180 degrees. Let's take a look at the first example. It says, using an equation, solve for x, then fill in all missing angles. So, looking at this diagram closely, we're going to have to decide whether the two angles I colored in are complementary or supplementary. Now, there's a 90-degree angle on the left, and this whole diagram is a straight line, which means the two angles on the right also would have to add up to 90 degrees. And since the two angles on the right add up to 90 degrees, they are complementary angles. So what I'm going to do is add them together and set them equal to 90 degrees. Next, I'm going to combine like terms. And from here, you guys know how to solve the equations. I'm going to add 10 to both sides, and then bring down my 4x, divide by 4, and then x equals 25. And now that I know what x equals, I can solve for both of the angles. My blue angle is just x degrees, so that is 25 degrees. My red angle is 3x minus 10, so I'm going to do 3 times 25 minus 10, which is 75 minus 10, which is 65 degrees. So let me write in that angle, 65 degrees. Now there is a way to check to see if this is correct. Add the angles together. You should get 90 degrees. And if you do, that means that you solved this correctly. So let's check that off and move on to the next example. Now on this next example, I have to decide, are these complementary or supplementary angles? Well, the blue and red angle make up a straight line, which means that I should add them together and set them equal to 180 degrees because they're supplementary angles. So I'm going to add them together and set them equal to 180. I combine like terms, and then I solve like normal. I'm going to add 10 to both sides of my equation, bring down the 2x, I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides, and I get x equals 95. We still have to solve for the angles. So starting with the blue angle, which is x minus 20, I plug in my 95, and I solve to get 75 degrees. So let me go ahead and write down 75 degrees in this blue angle. Now the red angle is x plus 10. So I'm going to write down x plus 10, and I'm going to plug in my 95, and then I solve and get 105 degrees. So let me go ahead and write down 105 degrees in my red angle. There we go. And I can still check to see if these make sense. So this is a supplemental angle pair. So if I add them together, I should get 180 degrees. And I do, which means that I did this correctly. So check it off and go to the next example. On this next example, these two angles make up a straight line, which means they're supplementary. So I should add them together and set them equal to 180 degrees. Then combine like terms and solve for x. So here I'm solving for x, subtracting 12, bring down 6x, divide by 6, I get x. Now that I have x, I have to solve for both of my missing angles. The blue angle is x plus 10, so let's start there. So x plus 10, I'm going to plug in my x, which is 28, and I get 38 degrees. So I know my blue angle is 38 degrees. Now my red angle is 5x plus 2, which means I have to do 5 times 28 and then add 2. And once I solve that, I get 142 degrees. So I'm going to write in my angle there. The red angle is 142 degrees. Now, since I said these angles are supplementary, when I do a check, they should add up to 180 degrees. So this is me doing my check. And when I add them together, I do get 180 degrees, which means I did this correctly, and I can go to the next example. The two angles below are complementary. Using an equation, solve for x, then fill in all missing angles. Since they're complementary, I'm adding them together and setting them equal to 90. Then I combine like terms and go through the normal steps of solving an equation for x. Once you get x, which is 9, I'm going to plug in 9 every time I see x so I can find these missing angles. The blue angle is 5x minus 3. And if I plug in 9, I get 42. So the blue angle is 42 degrees. My red angle says 3x plus 21. And I have to plug in my 9. And when I solve there, I get 48 degrees. So I have 42 degrees and 48 degrees, and we're saying that these are supposed to be complementary. So for my check, I'm going to add these together and see if they actually add up to 90 degrees. And they do, which means that I solved this correctly and I can move on to the next example. These three angles make up a straight line, which I know is 180 degrees. So they are supplementary. I'm going to add all three angles together and set them equal to 180. Then I combine like terms and I solve my equation as normal to try to find x. Once I found x, I have to plug in 38 every time I see x to solve for each missing angle. So my red angle, I did 38 plus 12, and I found out my red angle is 50 degrees. For my green angle, I'm going to do 2 times 38 plus 16, and I find that my green angle is 92 degrees. Then the blue angle is super easy. The blue angle is just x degrees. And if x is 38, that means the blue angle is just 38 degrees. Now, I said these angles are supplementary, so if I add them all together, they should add up to 180 degrees, which they do, which means that I did this correctly. Okay, now we're experts. Try your practice problems and check them over with your answer key.